Welcome to another episode of The Breakdown. Oh boy. Oh boy, he said. Oh boy, he said a third time. Because this is going to be an episode that I suspect is going to get some let's go with mixed, perhaps diverse reactions. Because one of the things that we've done here at The Breakdown with some uh, consistency is we've done a very, very good job of having conversations with progressive voices. The conservative voices, they keep refusing our interview requests. I can't even begin to imagine why. For the most part, it's not like we did a conversation with John Carpay that went very badly a few years ago. But for some reason, we can't get any press secretaries to respond to our interview requests. That being said, one of the self-imposed, self-declared mandates of the breakdown is to have good faith conversations. So tonight, in the spirit, and I'm gonna do a little reference here. If you haven't seen this film, you should check the film out. Very good film. In the spirit of the fog of war, which is a documentary on Robert McNamara, where he details some rules for understanding uh, conflict. In the spirit of the fog of war, we're going to do things very, very differently tonight because we are having on not just two UCP members, we are having on two UCP organizers. I hope you guys don't get your memberships revoked. I don't know if you've heard, but there's a few folks that are not fans of this program. Got a couple folks on who are involved in the UCP organization. They're involved in the constituency associations, and they're involved in the policy beats, which is how they met. If I'm getting that right, one of them is already squinting, so I don't know. We'll sort that out in a second. Very excited to welcome to the program again, and this is going to come as a shock to some folks. I'm sure it is. She has been on the program before speaking about education. She has been on the program before speaking about curriculum. Tonight, she's speaking as somebody who attended the UCP AGM. Very excited to welcome back to the program Andrea Willman, joining her. Oh, brace yourselves, folks. He is a loud voice on the social medias. He has absolutely promised that this is going to be a good faith conversation, so I feel very good about this tonight. He's a political organizer and has been so in the province of Alberta going back quite some time. First time on the program. Welcome to Kris Moen. Welcome to both of you. This should be interesting.
Hello, great to be on here.
Andrew, you're making squinty face.
No, I'm going to make a lot of faces. I'm just not going to mask tonight. That's just how this is going to go.
That's cool.
Yeah, no, we actually met through ASCA, through the Alberta School Councils Association. Before we met through the policy stuff. So we have multifaceted experiences.
Okay. The reason for this conversation tonight, Andrea, you pitched this to me. And so
I pitched it to Kris. I pitched it to Kris first because it was in person. We were at the AGM and we were having a fantastic conversation. And at some point I was like, I think we should have this conversation on camera. Would you be willing to do that? And he said, yes. And I said, I think I could ask Nate. I think I could. And then I did.
And here we are. Now, there's going to be a lot, and I'm putting a clock on this for 90 minutes because otherwise I suspect that we'll be here till 2 o'clock in the morning, and nobody wants that. We've done it before; it's miserable. So there's a 90-minute clock on this episode. That being said, I know that the crux of the conversation that we're going to have tonight for you two folks is around education. I want to be very, very clear. There are some very, very high profile, high level issues that I would absolutely be remiss if I didn't ask for your personal, not speaking for the party, just to be clear. Any executive directors who may or may not be catching this episode in the future, they're just speaking for themselves. Don't get angry. There's no need for any sort of revocations or anything like that. That would be childish. but speaking only for yourselves, I'm going to ask for your perspectives on that. But before we do, Andrea, if you wouldn't mind doing, we'll go in alphabetical order of first names because I'm a little lazy. Andrea, if you wouldn't mind doing a little bit of introduction. And in the introduction, I would appreciate it if you included how it is that somebody who many of our viewers and listeners is going to go, but she's a progressive. How did you end up at the UCP AGM?
Cool. That is quite a story. I get to give credit to my MP, actually. Um, I was following politics because I'm a social studies teacher anyway, but the first time vouchers came up as an option back in 2019, I called my MP and I was kind of concerned about it. And he said, don't worry about it. Nobody votes those kinds of silly things through. Don't worry about it. We're good. And so I bought a membership because I felt like maybe participating was a better way to know what's going on than just listening to my MP for provincial matters. So I did. And then when the curriculum draft dropped, I started reaching out to my MLA to become engaged. And that was Tracy Allard at the time. And she was so good at listening. She held virtual roundtables. She held our voices. She was able to mirror and to paraphrase back to make sure we were being heard. And then she wrote a 6-page letter that we heard our own words through, that she read on the floor of the legislature. And that was so empowering and making it feel like you could actually participate in politics as just a regular person. So Tracy and I conversed quite a bit over that time, and I joined her board by going to an AGM, and the AGM didn't have enough people in attendance to vote. It was all by attrition. So made it onto the board. And then I spent a year just being myself on the board, which is a bit of a dissenter and a bit of a contrarian and somebody who's asking the hard questions. And then it came time for another AGM. New MLA, knew the whole thing. I didn't pretend to be anybody different. I promised to be exactly who I am, and I was encouraged to put my name forward again for this board, and I got voted in, knowing that I'm somebody who is loud and dissenting and asks very specific and hard questions, and I'm a giant pain in the ass. But my constituency association seems to think that's a really good thing, and I really appreciate them for that. So now I do that more full-time than part-time because I'm not a teacher anymore.
Yeah, we've had that conversation on the show before, and what a I'm trying not to use too much profanity these days. It's getting harder and harder, but wrongdoing that whole situation is.
It's okay. So that was 2022, but technically I left teaching in 2017. So pre all of that stuff. In hindsight, I left after 12 years because I didn't think I could survive constantly asking for a job all the time. Like I left because it hurt too much to stay. And I tried subbing for the longest time, but you can't sub and advocate. So I had to choose.
Which is, and I want to say this again for the record, the fact that you were trying to advocate for students and you were
My
told,
kids. My kids.
yeah, and you were told, no, you're not allowed to do that and function as a teacher. That is so dissonant to me because it is a refusal of awareness of subject matter experts, I'll say. Um, just planting seeds as we go. And that blows my mind. So, anything else you want to add to the bio piece before we get to Mr. Moen?
I'm not different than I was before people learned I'm part of the UCP. So I'm not different depending on what room I'm in. I say the same things when I meet Nahid Nenshi. or when I met Rachel Notley, or when I met any of the NDP people who venture out to Grand Prairie. It's just weird that I'm encouraged to be a dissenter in the UCP more than in the school system.
Good note to end it on. Mr. Moen, I mean, uh, you've been doing this for a while, so
Yep.
go ahead. What's your story in politics?
All right. So my story was I was just a regular old conservative voter right up until 2015. When, much to my surprise, Rachel Notley got elected as the NDP. And I was traditionally, up until that point, I was a Wild Rose voter and left the PCs in the Redford area because I thought that she was far, far, far too progressive. And then switched back to the PCs right at 2015 in the last week of the election, just to simply try to, save the furniture. But that didn't happen too well. Then the other big shocker was the night that Stephen Harper lost the Conservative election, which was kind of expected a little bit more. It was a not too good campaign. But I was out there celebrating a wedding anniversary with my wife, and we were coming home from Las Vegas, and I was in the American Express lounge. And one of the great things about being in the lounges is you get free booze. So basically, it's like splashed across the screen is Trudeau wins, and I'm like, "Hey, bartender, could you please? Why don't you just leave the bottle?" Because I got a ride home. But anyways, so coming out of that one, then very quickly became, okay, so what are we going to do as Alberta Conservatives come into 2016? And all of a sudden, a guy by the name of Jason Kenney says, "Hey, I'd like to become Alberta Premier." And I'm like, not that, Jason. I don't know what I think about that. But I ended up happening to attend a couple of rallies, and particularly once Jason Kenney won the Progressive Conservative leadership. So the merger still hadn't happened yet. Then I just sort of started to become more and more interesting. And then sort of the night of the merger, when the Wild Rose and the PCs came together, that's when I decided, okay, fine, I'm going to go buy a membership in the brand new UCP at the first opportunity. And let's get involved in politics, because let's start to shape things more than just darkening a photo basically putting in a little ballot box once every 4 years. So then I very quickly sort of got into the provincial apparatus. I found that the federal apparatus was a lot harder to get into, because basically up in my neck of the woods, there's like all my CA boards, we get 30 people, and we usually go at 35, 30, 40, or in one case, 67 applications to be a board member for one of 30. So that the same thing happens on the federal side. The challenge with it is that there's only 10 seats, not 26 on the federal side. So I eventually did end up getting involved more in the federal side. And the other great thing is on the provincial side, their conventions are much cheaper, and their conventions are annual, not once every 3 or 4 years. The federal convention, by the way, number one, you have to get a plane ticket, usually somewhere to the east, and you have to get multiple hotel rooms. Plus, it goes on for about 3-4 days. And in any location, when the Conservatives come to town, because they bring about 3,000 to 4,000 people with them, when you're going into Halifax, Quebec City, and pretty much any place but Toronto or Vancouver, you're going to book out all of the really expensive hotel rooms. And even the cheap ones become expensive. So anyway, long story short, so I got involved with initially, and up until very recently, the Calgary Edgemont, or as it was at that point, the Calgary Foothills riding. And then once the boundary redistribution happened, then I got involved in the Calgary Foothills. Then I attended my first AGM, which was the founding AGM. And I found that I could really get up at the microphone and kind of deliver a really 30-second quick hit punch. And that kind of gives you a bit of a rush when all of a sudden, at the time, 2,500, and then at this past one, 6,000 people, all of a sudden agree with you. And so I got involved with that. So that was 2018. Then in 2019, I wrote 3 policies that made it to the Calgary AGM. Then in the virtual 2020, I had about another 4 or 5. And then it kind of spiraled out amongst that. But then what ended up happening was coming out of the 2020 AGM that was virtual was I was getting up to the microphone so many times that one day I get a phone call saying, "Hey, how would you like to be involved in provincial party Policy and Governance Committee, PPGC?" So I'm like, sure. So we sat around there where they're like, "Hey, why are you here?" And they'll be like, "You keep coming up to the microphone." So we wanted to kind of tone that down. And you keep writing a whole bunch of policies. And we kind of want to tone that down too. But we really like what the policies that you're writing and the governance motions that you're writing. So I formed the governance committee. And, one of the first things that we did was I said, well, in terms of answering back to why do you go up to the microphone so much? I said, oh, by the way, there's a group of us. We didn't really like some of the policies that were in the 20s at the 2019 convention. So we were actively filibustering because, hey, guess what, guys? We're in politics. So that's part of the whole thing is you fill up and you just keep on talking and you just keep on talking. So then it just sort of got more and more involved. And then I suddenly started to realize that, well, politics is a pay to play kind of operation. So, if you want to go and get in front of some people who are not your local MLA, you got to attend their fundraiser. And so I ponied up, kind of convinced the wife. Well, kind of convinced the wife through the daughter. Basically, what I do is I help fund my daughter's dance classes by basically buying her off, saying, "Okay, I'll pay for your social. By the way, could you put in a good word with me with mom in order to get, in order to not mind that whole that whole fundraising line item on the credit card." But hey, it works so far. I've got a happy wife, I've got a happy daughter, and we're just all motoring along there. But before I close and before I hand it over the microphone, as Nate, as you kind of alluded to here, yeah, kind of a bit of a loud voice, especially on the Twitter space. And I do realize that back in the 2019 election, you and I, we kind of had it out a little bit. And I kind of said some things, maybe right now, actually, I do 100% apologize for. There was an intentional campaign and I was part of the group. You might have called us the honorary Matts, the honorary Matt Wolfs. We were out there pre-2019 to make sure that we drove the Alberta Party vote down, and you were an Alberta Party candidate at the time. You were an Alberta Party candidate with my friend Rajan Sani. So I'm like, okay, let's make sure that we win one for the Northeast. And then we got into government, and then that just sort of continued. And then sort of the whole, and there was, I think there was a Melanie Thomas dissertation on this whole thing about, the overall Mats and the internal UCP spokespeople. But yeah, I kind of said a bunch of things there, Nate. So I'd like to apologize here to you personally for causing you a bit of some pain and a lot of heartache that was probably unintentional, but at the time it was like, yeah, we're just going to go out, we're going to hurt Nate. So for that, I apologize.
Well, I appreciate the apology. There was not to diminish your efforts. It was more of an annoyance than it was heartache and hurt. But I do, and sincerely, I do appreciate and respect the apology, and especially given that I appreciate your willingness to have a good faith conversation now. Because I'll be totally honest. When Andrea pitched the idea, I was like, really though? I have skepticism that there's going to be the ability to have a good faith conversation. So I appreciate you saying that a lot.
That's true. When I pitched the idea, Kris was like, "Yeah, no, I'm like, yeah, I know. Nate already told me what you did." So I still pitch the idea because I think it's important to have these conversations outside of echo chambers.
But I think this also, I'm going to take an opportunity to highlight something based on what you've said there and what I'm going to interpret, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, is a little bit of remorse. There has been a use of bad faith in political conversations. There has been the the to go back to my fog of war, I was deliberately not going through the rules that McNamara lists off there because I do not like the use of the term enemy. But there has been a weaponization of politics to dehumanize the people who are having those conversations, to uh, view them through the lens of being just an enemy. And I think that that's counterproductive in a whole bunch of different ways. So that's what I'll say there. The conversation that Andrea pitched um, came out of a conversation on education and vouchers. And I think this is going to be interesting because I'm going to ask both of you to define some terms. But in the pre-interview, we were talking a little bit about how, and it's wildly paradoxical to me because to me there is no greater investment than any society can pursue than education. Certainly not off-brand children's medications. I would put education way above that. Um, Foreshadowing. But it's not one that changes voters. So we're going to have this big, robust, hopefully, big, robust conversation about the future of education in the province of Alberta and where the two of you see the direction that the UCP might take things. And it probably won't change anyone's minds. So that's fun. But Andrea, talk a little bit about the conversation that you and Kris had, because I know one of the big pieces, you've already mentioned the word, so I'm going to ask you to define your term. What is a voucher? Why should people who don't care care?
Okay. I'm not going to define voucher. I'm going to let Kris define voucher.
Mhm.
This started because we ended up in the same working group this summer on writing a policy for the AGM about vouchers. So the way that works is everybody submits policies, and 900-ish of them were submitted by people like me. I submitted 4 personally. One of them was about vouchers, but it was kind of a joke. I sent it in without my board's approval, just to test, see what would happen. So my version of the voucher was, sure, let's do vouchers, but if you take public money, you can't take membership fees or tuition. But just to make sure that nothing is being lost by anyone, Weber and Rundle can set the price for the voucher. That was turned down, but I got put in the working group. So Kris and I spent like 3 hours on a Zoom meeting trying to write one policy. It was us and some homeschoolers, and it was, my dad was in the background. He had some thoughts.
I can I can imagine. Okay, so Kris, Andrew's putting it to you. What's a voucher?
Mhm. Okay, so at its most basic thing, a voucher is a piece of paper that you exchange for goods or services. Now, in the educational section, a school voucher, and this is the American version of it, is whereby the government basically gives you a piece of paper that you can take to your local public school board, traditional public school board, or a charter school, or even depending upon what the parameters are, even a private school. And you can exchange that for, if they take you on as a student, then that's how the charter school or the public school system gets funded. Most of actually in the States, most of them, the public system is still funded through the traditional aspect of it. So it's primarily the charter and or the private school system that whereby you can basically send as a parent, send your kid over to there. And like if it's in the Arizona case, then $7,000 goes to fund your kid's education. And the charter school systems, they are completely privately run. Most of them do have a prohibition on them taking profits, which pretty much means in some cases then the principal, the executive director, and all the head honchos turn around and basically make themselves really rich. And sometimes in the States, they go bankrupt. So that is what, in its essence, what a school voucher is. So where in Alberta here, the traditional conservatives like the term school voucher is, number one, it comes out of like Arizona and Ron DeSantis out of Florida. And there's a certain element of Alberta conservatism that goes, hey, if Ron DeSantis loves it, so do I. And so consequently, like one of the things we were talking about with Andrea in the group was there was a push to say, well, let's call it something else other than a school voucher. And I said, no, 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 no. The average conservative voter that goes out there into the social media space recognizes the term school voucher, knows it comes from the conservative side, knows that the Trumpians love it in terms, and the, Trump's first term education assistant, whose name, secretary, whose name escapes me right
now. Man's wife.
Yeah, I was going to say it's Vince McMahon's wife.
Yeah.
Who was involved in the cover-up of abuse of young men. So cool.
Yeah.
Let's use that as a model.
Yeah. So that's
those before. So what
I know, but
yeah.
When you hand the torch to someone.
That's where it comes into. And then, so actually now 2 AGMs ago, so for the 2023 AGM, I wrote a school voucher policy. Actually, it's from 2022, but it didn't make the top 30. Then in 2023, it made the top 30. And it was the only one that was voted down. And it was voted down in a close vote from, there was a couple of things. The major push was there was a bunch of policies and what they were, so what a certain group, you might have heard of them, Take Back Alberta. They sometimes don't like to call themselves Take Back Alberta today, but at the time they were like, hey, what they were looking to was because I, through my constituency association at the time, Calgary Edgemont, we had 6 of the top 30. And they just sort of looked at that and went, wait a minute, something's wrong here. Like, we got to find a way to get rid, let's take Calgary Edgemont down a notch. Well, they couldn't do it for my policy number 1 because it was in support of the net zero 2035. Like, let's ban net zero 2035. That was the most popular one. Like, okay, go at it, boys. Do you really want to support Trudeau just to send me a message? And then all the other ones, they were well written. They were well written as sort of conservative, really meat and potatoes conservatives. So then they all kind of banded together. There was another little quirk in terms of some of the other duties that I was doing on provincial policy and governance. They were like, oh, we don't like it. So we're going to send you a message. So it went to a vote. It went to a manual count, and it was 55% no, 45% yes. So I lost that one, but then I just turned around, resubmitted it, and reached out to to primarily what I found out to be a homeschooler group that said, okay, so how do you guys want to make us? Well, let's all work together. Let's all make this policy that you can support. And in fact, when I was in the when Andrea and I were in the working group, they were like, so what do you want? And I'm like, well, I have no pretensions about the fact that whatever we write will actually become government policy. And that shocked a whole bunch of them. They're like, oh, no, no, no. If we write it and we pass it at a UCP convention, then Danielle Smith will just simply take it word for word. And I'm like, that's not how it works.
I gotta jump in there. I got to jump in there because I think that if you were to say that's not how Jason Kenney worked, right, I think I could be on board with you on that. But Danielle Smith has publicly, on the record, on multiple occasions, said it is her job to take the policies that are put forward at convention. Sometimes it takes a little while, it takes a year or so, guys. So everybody don't get too excited, but I swear I'm going to get to them. So I think that when it comes to policy advancement from a AGM.
Well, okay, so that's true. I'm going to stop you there. That is true. So Kris and I spent a lot of time trying to help everybody in that group remember that when you're writing policy, there are very strict rules about how you have to write policy. And part of that, those rules are that you are not dictating law. You are making suggestions to the party who happens to be in power. It is supposed to be very specifically written in a way that it is advice to the party about the government, not to the government. Like that is very clear in the process. And locally, our CA spent a lot of time making sure that our policies aligned with those rules. I got irritated at the AGM by how many policies made it through without following those rules, Kris.
Yeah.
So that's where I want to just take the space to highlight that there is a change that has occurred. And I think that's something that everybody on all points on the political spectrum do need to be aware of, because, if you had said in 2015, 2019, what the party brings forward doesn't necessarily become government, it doesn't turn into law, then I would have said, yeah, I've written policy too. I agree 100%. I do struggle, though, in making the same blanket statement about UCP policy coming out of an AGM in 2023, 2024, and I have the Premier's own words to demonstrate that's how she views it. So do with that what you will.
Oh, yes, and I would 100% agree with you, Nate. I became definitely somewhat after the 2023 AGM. I became sort of aware of like, okay, guys, like, what are we doing here? And then when I was doing training in Edmonton and Calgary to all these conservatives, I then all of a sudden sort of flipped over to the other side. Basically, had a little bit of an epiphany there to be like, oh no, like Danielle Smith's actually going to do, as you said, Nate. Danielle Smith is going to actually take what you wrote. And then that was abundantly clear at her accountability sessions, whereby she held 6,000 people on her every word, going through all the policies from 2022 and 2023 and saying, done, done, in progress, done, done. So while at a certain point, I'm like, yay, because I had about a dozen of them. Would have been nice to have, baker's dozen of 13, but hey. But that's where it was just like, oh, okay, so what are we going to do now? The other thing too, and that's where Andrea says is sort of like, so what ended up happening with some of the policies that got through? There's a couple things there. Number one was Provincial Policy and Governance Committee is facilitative only. We have a very short set of rules that we can reject. And even then, we don't like using the word reject. We like using the word, well, we're going to really, really vet your policies and not so much force you, but we'll just keep sending you revisions after revisions if there's something that's dramatically wrong. So one of the few things we can say, no, you can't actually suggest wording for changes to the Education Act, but you can write it down into a policy. Now, how we usually turn that around is normally it'll be somebody who is let's say a lawyer standpoint, wants to write it, or they're a lobbyist. And we're like, hey, by the way, just to let you know, there's going to be like thousands of other UCPers, and they're not going to like your 50-page amicus brief style. And that usually gets them to turn it around to let's shrink it into like a couple sentences. But yeah, absolutely. And so also what ended up happening, I should also like to tell everybody on the Twitter space, because this is all publicly information now. So we had 203 finalists just for policy, and we had 56 governance matters. What was voted on at the AGM was just simply, out of that 203, was the top 35 policies. So there's a whole schwack of them that just didn't make it. And then as well, too, we also did the top half of the governance resolutions, and we only did about the top 20 out of the 56. But in the initial one, the one that Andrea sent in which was actually the correct procedure for everybody, all the Conservatives and UCP members, is yes, any member can submit. They don't need CA board approval to submit. So Andrea could just submit. And I looked at hers at first and I went, yep, this is Andrea. And okay. So that's where, and we had 732 of those, we had 732 individual policies, and we had 160 odd governance resolutions. So that's how Andrea mentions the 900. That's how you get to the 900 is, and there's only 16 of us on PPGC. And I clocked it out at about 350 hours purely volunteer service just on PPGC. And so we got overwhelmed. And we got overwhelmed the previous year because they had about 200 of them. So we did some IT work in order to make it easier and faster and better for submissions. And then we wound up with like 900. And we're like, ooh. So this year, actually, and one of the other reasons why I can speak a little bit more freely is at the end of every AGM, Provincial Policy and Governance Committee gets disbanded. So I've submitted my application for to be brought back onto the group. And but yeah, we just submit every year. So we'll see in the new year what happens.
I'm curious if Dustin knows that you're doing the show, but I guess we'll see.
He doesn't, but I'll tell him afterwards.
There we go. I want to go back to the vouchers because I do want to. We're going to go down this policy rabbit hole a little bit in a bit, but I want to make sure you guys both gave me a couple of things that you wanted to make sure that we talked about before I get my turn. And one of the pieces with the vouchers, I guess the question that I want to ask each of you is, at its core, why do you believe vouchers are a good thing? Because the counter argument that exists for against vouchers is that if you start to make money that's in the educational system portable, then you are de facto defunding the public education system because there will be people who have religious reasons for taking their kids to religious schools. There will be people who have the financial ability to take their kids to other schools. So while vouchers are many people would argue, while vouchers are providing choice, they are also, I'm going to use the premier's verbiage here, a de facto defunding of the public education system, which for many people is the only thing that they have access to, especially when we're talking about smaller communities, rural Alberta. There's not a whole lot of Webers being knocked together in Fairview or Grimshaw. So, Andrea, I'm going to go to you first, and then I'm going to go to Kris. Why do you think vouchers should potentially? I mean, I get the sense that your policy may have been a little bit satirical, but
it was pie in the sky. It was shooting my shot. What do you do? Like, right? Like, I would love to be able to offer my kids the education, the world class education that Weber's able to provide. That would be great. Let's do that. So if they could just tell us how much it actually costs to deliver a world-class education, I'd be really happy to know that. And then we could just make that the what happens for everybody, right? Kris and I talked about this is the bulk of our conversation at the AGM, because how it's not working. The current model is not working. The weighted moving average is redonkulous. It is so bad. The deficits that the districts are running is more than is reasonable, and needs aren't being met. Let's be clear.
Oh, for sure. And I think that I would like to think, excuse me, I would like to think that if there's one thing that the most Albertans could agree on is that education in the province of Alberta, sorry, still getting over that cold thing. Education in the province of Alberta is not appropriately funded either by the volume of the dollars or the placement of the dollars. So I have not run across anybody who looks at the education and without a hint of satire goes, this is fine. I just simply haven't met that person. If you're
I'm
out
sorry.
there,
Have you talked to the Alberta School Boards Association lately? They're very happy with everything that's going on. Their messaging is 100% positive.
then they're lying. I'll just say that.
Well, that's school board trustees that are elected by you, the public. The elections are coming in October, And if you're upset with how things are going, your trustees are the people who are telling you everything's fine.
So here's before I move to Kris, I just want to put a little. I know that you're angry about this. See, this is why I was like, but it's not fine. Why do you think that vouchers? Well, let me back that up. Do you think that vouchers are a viable solution to solving the problems of the education system?
Maybe I'm on the maybe train because it depends on what that means. If it means you're using it like you're using it for public health care, where you go in and your needs are assessed and identified and then dealt with, then yeah, actually, like if the school system could bill by assessment, like if do you know what I mean, Kris?
I do,
You
but
actually
this is
explain that better.
here's the
Kris,
question that I want to get because you opened the door for me, and then we'll go to Kris. I promise. Um, Not all students are created equal. Not all students cost the
humans
same.
humans are not created
Yeah, no,
equal.
for sure. So where one kid may be able to go to a school, and for the purposes of this piece of the conversation, I don't care if it's private or public or charter or I do care if it's religious. I can't let go of that. But I don't care if it's any of those things. One student can go there and not require massive additional supports. If you put now a kid who's dealing with something like autism spectrum disorder or ADHD or trauma, then it doesn't matter what school system you put them into. By nature of their reality, they're going to need more. And so if we take the approach of everything's fair, everybody's equal, everybody gets the same amount, then it seems to me that that works great for everybody who's, they fit in the cookie cutter mold. But for the kids that don't, they're just screwed. Am I
Kind of.
wrong?
Yeah, no, that is how it's working. Those kids are red ink. They are part of why there's deficits in school boards. Absolutely. And and that sucks because that feels like the boards are being asked to operate as like an insurance company that decides whether you're covered or not. And they get to decide whether your needs are necessary. And that is written into legislation. So section 11-3 of the Education Act uses the word may, as in a board may determine if a student has anything getting in their way of having the opportunity to meet the standards. I've talked to Alberta Ed extensively. I have followed up on this. They 100% have confirmed that a board does not need to tell them about a kid who has been queried but deemed not medically necessary, kind of thing, right? Like there's no stats on the kids where the teacher says something's up, we got to look at this kid, and then told differentiation is the only option you have.
Okay. Now, before I throw it to Kris, I just want to offer one quick summation of what you said there, because what you're describing hits on what I think is a critically important point. Um, the system has failed. Because the system has failed, and please correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm trying to paraphrase a little bit, and I'm not in any way trying to put words in your mouth, but the system has failed, and because the system has failed, you're now looking at, okay, so how do we change the system, burn the system down? And I think the key takeaway here for all of the progressive audience that has made it this far, so thanks to the two of you, I think the key takeaway here is it is the failure of the system that drives people to entertain things like vouchers. And if you don't want that to be a topic of conversation, maybe make sure the system doesn't fail. Am I doing okay for you, Andrea?
Yeah, that'd be cool. I would totally be good with status quo if it were working, but
There
it
we
is
go.
not.
Okay.
So let's try some different ideas. So when I talked to Kris at the AGM about this stuff, he described how his voucher would work. And my first question was that prompted my like, I need to know whether you will have this conversation on camera conversation was, if we do the voucher the way that you said, parents will be excruciatingly aware of how little actually goes to their kid. Is that right, Kris?
Yes. Yeah. And sort of, I don't know. Can I go ahead, Nate? Okay.
Yeah, this.
So, I mean, leaping off it, yeah, like, I mean, everything that Andrea said, it's 100% true. And I believe that for many school years, for many years, going through my own kids' education system. What I hope to get out of a school voucher system is to basically convert the entirety of the 250 odd page Alberta government, Alberta education funding manual into a per student amount. So like currently right now, basic is, if your kid attends school, minus the weighted moving average, if your kid attends school, then you get about $6,500. That goes to your kid's school board. Now, that's not 100% true, because the moment that you get into specialized learning supports and a number of other grants, they're just bulk funding in order to provide the program. So they're not a per student amount. And then as well, too, even the basic per student amount of $6,500 per child. The education minister, he comes back sort of mid-school year or right around in July. The last one was Minister Nicolaides in July, sort of said, well, there's going to be record new enrollment come September, so we're going to give an extra $125 million in order to cover off, and that covered off everybody's projected new schools. New numbers of new students. Now, in a Calgary Board of Education standpoint, in July, they were projecting 9,000 new students growth. And then in October 1, they only calculated about 5,000. And I'm thinking that might have been more or less half, like closer to the 4,500 mark, but we'll see. But they don't.
They're going to get clawbacks. They're going to get,
so then they never got
money
that
taken away.
Yeah, so then they never got the mid-year top up. But for those 5,000 kids, according to CBE, they're fully topped up at the 6,540 level. My understanding is that there was another sort of quirk and change with the revenue funding model. So the four major metro boards, Edmonton Public, Edmonton Catholic, Calgary Public, Calgary Catholic, they all got an extra allotment in order to go out and hire more teachers. The rest of the province, however, what?
Did they find them all? Did they fill those spots?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Calgary Board of Education, like all the trustees.
How did they find those teachers?
Yeah, I'm gonna challenge that they actually hired the number of teachers that they needed.
They did. In Calgary Board of Education standpoint, they basically take from Airdrie, Okotoks, Cochrane, like the whole Rocky View schools, even up into Grand Prairie.
Slowly, the schools around Calgary lost teachers to feed Edmonton, just to be clear.
To feed Edmonton, not to feed Edmonton. Yeah, in order to feed Calgary Board of Education, they stole teachers from around the province. That's how they funded them.
That's not great for the rest of us, Kris.
I know, 100%. But anyway, so kind of getting back to the whole school vouchers thing. So the $6,500 amount for per child. So when I take a look at, so the provincial government, or essentially, now Dimitri Nicolaides, he cuts a check for $6,500 so that my kid can go to her local school, her local Calgary Board of Education school. And then when I go and I talk with my kid's principal and I divide the number, the amount of dollars coming in for students' instruction, and I divide that by the number of students, I get a number that's around $4,300. And I've asked this all the way up to the CFO, Brad Grandy. I said, what's the difference? And they'll be like, they kind of really skate around it. Like, I mean, he's basically doing a really good Connor McDavid impression. And he skates around the whole question, and then eventually I'm like, oh, okay, fine. But in a true school voucher system, the schools are the ones that get the money. They get the full $6,500. and then whatever's sort of left over to cover off system administration, then the system administration sort of gets it. So, and consequently, also as well too, one of the other informations that I got from a school councils meeting a couple moons ago was Calgary Board of Education, their full-time equivalency status, they value a teacher at $109,000. So you can basically calculate, and it actually proves out the number of FTEs allocated to your school times 109,000. Well, if you gross it all up there, essentially what that means is the Calgary Board of Education could have average class size for a middle school of about 26 kids and still be profitable and still be or still have some money left over so they don't have really large deficits. So
okay, so it's a beginner teacher, a brand new teacher does not cost $109,000, and
correct.
You cannot make more than 11 years of experience on the grid. So 109 is like the middle then, right?
Well, no, so $109,000. So okay, sorry, I'm an accountant by trade. So that is how you do the imputation. So what the $109,000 would cover is it would cover the teacher's salary plus the employer portion of the pension plan, plus the professional development days, plus the benefit plans of employer provided benefits and all that. And then they calculate it all out there. And then when they go back to the teachers, when they go back to the principals, they end up saying, well, okay, you can budget at about $109,000 per FTE teacher. And then there's another lower amount, of course, for the EAs. And that's how they can say, well, okay, I can afford to have 7 classes in grade 9 and 6 classes in grade 7 and what forth. Oh my God. That's how they take. This is how that's how principals get their funding.
Are you saying that they're incentivized to hire new teachers who don't cost as much?
No, they're not. The system is.
Okay, sorry. In the teacher world, it is actually pretty common to be told that once you're more expensive, it's harder to get hired.
Yes. And I want to jump in with something else here because we're ignoring or not addressing a couple of other pretty major factors. I am going to continue to say I don't know that we can say that the Calgary system, whether we're talking Catholic or public, has all of the teachers that it needs. I'm going to say this for 2 reasons. One of them is just a couple of months ago, there were 125 teaching positions that were open, not filled with the Calgary Catholic School Division. Going into this year's school year, there was quite a bit of media coverage that talked about the fact that Calgary was going to be seeing a decrease of 250 teachers throughout their workforce. So part of the game here, and I think this is really important to highlight, part of the game that's being played, and yes, to Andrea's point, it's being played by school boards, but also politicians, is, well, we can have enough teachers for the class numbers as long as we don't talk about the class sizes, as long as we don't talk about the class complexity. And so it gets to a point where, if a school board or government body, cough, province of Alberta, cough, says we have the teachers, um, the metrics to determine that have been quite literally, in many cases across the province, erased. We do not track class sizes in the same way that we historically did in the province of Alberta. That was removed. So I want to just really, really make sure that we're not presenting the education system as, oh, we've got all the teachers that we need. If we define a classroom as being a space that we can stack kids in, okay, maybe you can get away with that argument. But when it comes to the optimal learning environment, I don't think that anybody can make the argument that any school district in any part of the province has the number of teachers that they need in appropriate numbers.
And let's not talk about teachers as warm bodies. Please.
Yes. Yes.
As a parent, I would like my child to learn music from a musician. I would like my child to learn art from an artist. And there are many musicians and there are many artists who have teaching degrees who aren't able to actually do what they're passionate about because they need to be a warm body that counts as staff per ratio. So they're teaching grade 2. It's not their forte, it's not their expertise, and it's not their place that they love. But they have a job, so that's cool.
Yeah. So, and again, I'm not trying to push back at you too hard there, Kris, but I think
Oh, it's okay.
when we start to play with the math of things, I always go back to my favorite show of all time and one of the titles of one of the episodes, Lies, Damn Lies, and Statistics, which is to say, you can play with statistics to justify just about anything, but I don't think that uh,
Right.
anybody who's working in the education system right now would be like, oh no, we're good.
Yeah.
Okay, so what I would like vouchers to do is to accomplish what is written in the ministerial order. Because that's the promise. The promise of what a the words world class are in that document. The promise is a world class education for every student while expanding choice. It doesn't mean focusing on the choices at the cost of. So we have 800,000 students that choose public education every day, and I would just like them to have the same world class education that is so lovely to see in the photo ops.
On that piece, there's one other thing that I want to talk about that I would like to get both of your perspectives on when it comes to the school choice piece and the vouchers piece. Because to be clear, I have my own moral and ethical concerns with anybody setting up a school and teaching things um, however they like. I think that there's some problems for society when we start to do that. Um, that's just me speaking for me. Uh, but it's not all treated equal. And I think we saw that in this legislative session, painfully so, when it came to the sex ed piece, because the government of Alberta has made some sweeping changes to how sex ed is delivered in a province with rocketing STIs, and a boatload of other problems that sex ed helps solve. Um, I'll tap you in a second. Don't worry, Andrea. I can also see Kris is chomping at the bit here too. So, but we saw the government come forward and say, "Hey, we've got all these super strict rules, and if you want to do this stuff, you got to get the approval from the ministry, unless, of course, you're a private school or a religious school, and then it's cool, do what you like." And that is deeply problematic for me because if you're going to say that we need to make changes to how sex ed is delivered in the province and make it more regressive, which is what's been done. Education experts, healthcare experts all agree on this. I don't know how you get to say, but we're going to carve out exemptions for the religious folk because they'll get mad.
I'm guessing it's because they have a pre-approved curriculum and the government doesn't need to worry about it. Wait, doesn't everybody have a pre-approved curriculum? Like, isn't that how that works? Like,
Yes, publicly available, no less.
as someone who has taught sex ed to grade 8 on a few different occasions with many varieties of groups, oh lordy, is that an important thing to do? They are so misinformed by the information that they can gather on their own, and they don't get to grow up with Sue Johansson. So it's only through the sex ed, and it's really important to teach how viruses spread. It's really important to teach how STIs can spread, but also the consent side of things. That's an explicit conversation. Have you seen the tea party? It's like inviting somebody to have tea conversation. It's a whole thing. If you haven't seen that analogy for consent, that's the right one. Do that one. That's sex ed in grade 8, right? Like, and then they hand in questions, and the questions, oh, have you ever had a 13-year-old boy try and put you on the spot as the teacher in the room during, oh my God, like, okay, but it's not something you can do without knowing who the kids are and knowing who they where their traumas are coming from. Like, if you don't know anything about the group that you are working with, you should not be doing sex ed with them because the triggers are enormous, and and it needs to be done well. And I used to use all of the government's provided material because that was the safe stuff to use. I didn't outsource that information. I went right to Learn Alberta and I used that. And they have quizzes and interactions and videos and things. And we follow it very specifically because if you don't, it goes off track so fast, 13-year-old boys.
So the question that I want to ask you, I'm going to bring it back to you because I know that you can go places. Um, if there was a voucher system, should it be levied equally?
Okay, how do you define equally?
Ooh, that's
Well,
literally
if
what
you're
our
going to say,
3-hour conversation with the homeschoolers was about, was what is, if they didn't even want the word equally or equality. They were very offended by those words. Like it became very, very heated. And what I think the voucher needs to accomplish is a world-class education according to the ministerial order, which is the standards by which we use for the Education Act. And it includes things that that's everything that people are asking education to do, whether it's in the public or the private or the separate or the homeschool, like everybody. This is a really well-written document, and we should just do that.
here's the question that I want to get at, though, and then I'm gonna try to answer your equal question, Chris, and then I swear to God, I'm gonna get you some mic time. But if you're going to say we're going to have $6,500 chase these students around. And this is going to be publicly funded $6,500. This is money that is coming from taxpayers to go towards the education. It seems to me it would be reasonable to say anyone who's going to access that $6,500 all has to play with the same rules of engagement. And so when you say, hey, public system, here's what the rules are going to be for you for how you can use these monies. Hey, religious schools and private schools, never mind, do what you like. That to me gets to a place of what are we doing with these taxpaying dollars? And this is where it gets really dissonant for me because one of the to my understanding, one of the principles of conservatism is accountability for taxpayer dollars. And we see the UCP as a government making choices in regards to how they believe, and I'm choosing my words so very carefully, the public education system should be held accountable. And right or wrong, they're wrong, but right or wrong, what I'm saying is, if you're going to move that public money into the religious schools or the charter schools, it would seem to me that those rules of engagement should be the same. The accountability level should be the same. You don't get to just make your own rules if you're using taxpayer dollars. That is the opposite of what this government has largely done when it comes to the sex ed piece. So, what I want to hear from you, Kris, is do you believe that there should be some sort of mechanism to make sure that those rules of engagement for anybody accessing public dollars from the public purse are playing by the same rules? Or should we be making specialized carve outs for religious people because we don't want to make them angry?
Well, I agree with you, Nate. I agree that there should be an accountability section. And in fact, that was one of the reasons why the homeschoolers torpedoed my 2023 plan, was because I basically got up there on the video and said, homeschoolers, you can get your homeschool funds if you agree to teach according to the Alberta curriculum, the Alberta Program of Studies. And then, much to my surprise, I find out where there was a whole bunch of the homeschoolers say, yeah, that's why we don't want to do this. And then I started to learn another system or another term. And the term is called notification only, no funding. So it's an exclusively Alberta program that says that if you're a parent and you agree to homeschool your kid and you say, I don't want any funding, just government, stay off my lawn, then you would be able to say, no, please don't send the truancy officers after my kid because they're not going to school. I will take on that responsibility. I won't have any funding. I'm still okay with that. I'm still okay with it. If you were a parent and you said, okay, fine, for, some days I just have to go back and say, well, I got to worry about my own kid and my own kid's education. And if the next door neighbor wants to do something different, that's at that point, it's up to them.
I've seen both results.
See,
I've
I would make the
I've seen
accusation. I would
I've
make the
seen
argument. I'm going to make my argument
Sure.
because I'm the host. Damn it. Um, I would make the argument that that is a result of a failed value proposition. Because I do believe that if you say, you know what, I'm going to let my neighbor do whatever they want and they can raise their kids however they want and they can, if they want to opt out of the system, then the next thing that we get is a bunch of Branch Davidians and tanks running through buildings. It doesn't work out so great in a lot of instances. But I
Mhm.
think that there is a failure that needs to be identified and discussed because if you can't say to a homeschooler,
Mhm.
here's why this is good in a compelling way, then you failed on the sales pitch. And uh, there is a language piece that I think gets to be important because I believe that good curriculum does good things for kids, for parents, for
Mhm.
society writ large. And if I believe that because I've looked at it and I've talked to the smart people. And if somebody hasn't had that opportunity, that is a failure of the system to make its case. And so I think it's really important. Like, yes, I don't think that we should be raising little Davies running around doing the horrible things, but
Mhm.
I also think that if that environment is incubating, it's because of a failure of the system to deliver on its value proposition.
in the
Exactly.
mommy
Yes.
groups, the Facebook mommy groups, the most common response to my kids aren't being met or my kids' needs aren't being met at school is homeschool. Right? Like when you're in the mommy chat groups and your heart is breaking as a mama because your kids are getting bullied to the point where they are looking to hurt themselves. Like when you're in those conversations in the Facebook groups where people are desperate and the answer is homeschooling, that's a societal thing. We've lost track of the social contract at that point. When the pain inside the public schools is so hurtful that the best option is to take your kid out. Oh my God. I had to pull my kids out of a school and switch schools. That hurt a lot. And that's the people I used to work with. So it's not working. If we could just accomplish this, it would be great. It has amazing words in it. It has the word mastery in it. It has being able to communicate your ideas with and views with intellectual rigor. It's got developing proficiency in English, and that applies to all of our new Canadians. It's got the ability to, okay, I'm going to give you the first sentence of the ministerial order. Education in Alberta will promote the acquisition of skills and the pursuit of knowledge with wisdom while valuing equality of opportunity, parenting caregiver responsibility, personal responsibility and excellence, and respects for difference and the inherent dignity of each individual. That covers everything we're fighting about all the time. If you are acquisition of skills, that's the things you can use in your real life. That's the skills you can use at work. If we're doing pursuit of knowledge with wisdom, knowledge seeks facts, but wisdom guides how we use them. If we are valuing equality of opportunity, that's ensuring all students have the same chance to succeed regardless of their background or circumstance. That's what that means. If we are valuing parent and caregiver responsibility and the student's personal responsibility and excellence, that's your work ethic, that's your accountability. That's kids showing up to class and actually giving a shit. Right? Like that's making sure that we have our parent and caregiver responsibility for excellence. If we don't have parents buying in and they're just sending their kids to school and those kids are hurting each other, what are we doing? The sentence isn't done. And that includes the respect and difference and the inherent dignity of each individual. That is in the order. That's what we're supposed to be able to accomplish. That's the intrinsic worth of every person, no matter the differences in their culture, their abilities, their perspectives. And the Education Act says that if you can't meet those those standards because you have something going on with your behavior, or you have a learning disability, or you have emotional issues, you are entitled, if those issues are identified, you are entitled to what you need to have the opportunity to meet this standard, that one. This document, if you as a parent feel like you are not getting your chance to meet these standards, then something is going wrong and there should be somebody held accountable for it. If we can do it through vouchers, awesome. If you're going to do it through your trustees who are going to get elected in October, cool. If you have to be a giant pain in the ass, do it.
I think you know that I respect giant pain in the ass is.
Yeah.
So I'm going to pivot a little bit here because we're burning through time. Kris, you did a lot of policy development. That document that that Andrea just read, gosh, it sure seems to me like that would have served well to help sort through some of the policies that made it through the UCP AGM. I'm bringing it
Actually,
back.
most of the ministerial order, most of the guts of it is already in the UCP policy declaration. It's already in there.
So what happened is what I want to know.
So very quickly, what happened? I know it's there because I put it there.
Okay.
And I put it there in the old Adriana LaGrange stage because I got what was then a draft copy of the new ministerial order, and that was the one that came out prior to the curriculum, about the time that my old principal, Alex Macbeth, he was the guy that, unfortunately, I had an early sort of viewpoint. I have a ton of respect for my former principal at Sweetgrass Elementary, where I grew up in Edmonton, in terms of Mr. Macbeth. He grew up in the Edmonton public school system. He became superintendent, all that sort of thing. And then many moons later, I found him on the stage. He wrote a really great critique of the curriculum that the NDP had written. Then
it's not supposed to be government writing curriculum, right? Like, it's not supposed to be.
Well, and let's also be clear, the NDP did not write the curriculum. Yeah. We're talking about a curriculum that was developed over more than
they bragged about it.
Okay, you're right, Nate.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, that it became a thing.
Yeah, Nate. So in the interest, I will retract it. It was the curriculum that was written during the David Eggen era. Can we say that?
During multiple eras, we can say that.
Yeah, during multiple eras.
Under them, it started under Stelmach, and then Redford, and then Art's 30 years old at this point.
Yes. But so one of the other things is that's when I also found out that that was the press release, or sorry, the presser where Alex, Principal Macbeth, got up there and basically compared the curriculum to like used car salesman, and I'm like, oh, that was bad.
No, what he
But yeah, but I basically took
used car salesman. Oh, that one stung. Yeah,
that one stung me. That one stung me, and that one stung me at a personal level because I could tell that he was probably should not have taken on the assignment because he was just a little bit too far along the retirement life. He should have retired on a high. But with that, so I sort of took those sort of notes and pounded them all into the UCP policy declaration. So it's there. Most of them, it's there. Not the piece that's on the world-class education, or the piece, Andrea, that you're talking about in terms of the needs of complex students. The needs of complex students is really, it's really difficult to write a policy about. And it's really difficult to write a policy about because it doesn't impact the vast majority of students. Ooh, you're really only talking about.
What if the policy was about updating the standards for special education? They're 20 years old. Our current standards for special education predate the DSM-5. Just saying.
Oh,
Well,
and I would love
here's
to write, if I could just have a second,
yeah.
I would love Andrea to write that. Two sort of things. Number one, it will never be a top 30 policy or top 35 policy. So it'll never see the floor. But there was a rather discreet line that came out of the UCP that yeah, it was written in the latest UCP member update. So one of the things, and I still have to do some things, but the premier has now requested the larger list of 203 finalized. So I don't know if it's the full list. I don't know if this is like, send me the file and I'll read it on my downtime whenever she has that.
Can you
But
push
I'm
her?
like,
Can you push my number 40, my section 40 of the Act one? Can you make that happen?
well, I can't for other reasons because Grand Prairie never finalized, as we've discussed before
Oh,
with UCA.
this,
But
I
if this continues and if this pops out, and this is a plug for all the UCP policy wonks, not like up until now, up until this year, you had to, in order for the government, in order for anybody to even look at it, you had to get it passed. That's why losing my school voucher policy in 2023 stung quite a bit. It would make my life harder in terms of advocating for it.
we
Whereas
didn't
the
make
easy
it,
path would have been it passed.
we didn't make it to the short list this year because
But we made it to the final 203. Those the voucher policy was ranked, it just wasn't in the top 35.
okay, but why wasn't it in the top 35?
I want to refocus this here, kids.
Yeah,
Uh,
sure.
um,
This is
because
actually pretty interesting.
well,
But what I'm saying, Andrea, is so if your policy makes it to the finalist and makes it to the ranking stage, there is a good chance that now that would get picked up. It might be some government staffer that gets tasked with, and I know all the policy advisors are going to hate me with this because the 203 policies, it's quite the book. But then that would mean then it would get picked up and potentially brought into government policy that way. As scary as that may be, and yes, that is scary.
now I'm going to
Oh,
refocus. So
that
Sure.
hurts more.
no, because the question that I wanted to, I got to keep us on track here. The question that I was trying to get at with the values in the ministerial order is I think that there are more than a few people, I would count myself as one of them, who would argue that a lot of the policies that made it to the UCP AGM do not reflect the values in that ministerial order. Um, there's lots to choose from. I've got 16 right in front of me, which is there ain't nothing but two sexes and genders. Uh, Science be damned. Uh,
Mhm.
that to me is not in alignment with those values, which is I was trying to find my way into the
Oh,
conversation.
it's in there. Inclusive environment where all students feel valued. That's in the ministerial order. Just saying.
Oh no,
Um,
that's in the ministerial order, but it's not in the UCP policies in a lot of the UCP policies that we saw at the AGM.
okay.
Yes.
So which every single part of those policies made it into the bills? Is that what happened? Like that's
Yes, every single policy that was presented at the AGM passed, and
Was
so
passed, yes.
yeah,
And they were all passed with flying colors.
yes, and this is why I say it's dissonant for me to listen to the values that Andrea is espousing in the ministerial order, and then
Mhm.
juxtapose that with the UCP policies that were voted on and passed overwhelmingly, and go, why couldn't you have used that as a filter? Because there's a lot of, and here's the point that I wanted to really work my way towards. I go back to 2018 because in 2018, at the party's founding convention for the United Conservative Party, uh, there was a policy that was brought forward and was voted on. And that policy had to do with outing kids who were attending GSAs. Rick McIver, current minister in this government, said, I'm going to quote, you may disagree with some people in the room with people being gay, but they are gay. They need to be safe. We cannot out kids that are in a club designed to protect themselves. Don't be called the Lake of Fire Party. I juxtapose that with a good number of the policies that were put forward and advanced at the UCP AGM, and I go, I feel like something's changed. And so this is where the question that I want to ask you, Kris,
Yeah.
because one of the arguments that people make, I might be one of them from time to time, is the UCP as it exists currently has managed to take the worst parts of the PCs and the worst parts of the Wild Rose and go, what if we just took all of that and mashed it together? And I do not say that to denigrate either of you. I want to be really
Mhm.
clear on that. But the ethos of the party seems to be those things. So I want to ask you before we get into the things that I want to talk about, because we have like 15 minutes left. Why you started off this conversation by saying that in 2015 you were a Wild Roser.
Yeah.
Why? Why in 2015 was Kris Moen a Wild Roser? What made it important for you to align yourself with the Wild Rose as opposed to the PCs?
In a really short answer, I felt that the Redford government was Alberta's first liberal government. That their policies were not just right of center; they were full on liberal.
She wrote a letter to the teachers during bargaining that said, take this deal or you won't like what we do to class sizes.
Yeah.
Super
But then
liberal.
all the teachers voted for Redford in
They
2012.
said, okay, we're scared. I absolutely don't want you to do that to
Mhm.
class sizes. Fine, we'll take your deal. Yep.
Yeah.
And I mean, don't get me wrong. I think that there's a lot to criticize about the Redford government,
Yeah.
uh, because we do that here. There's some
Mhm.
stark parallels. Hey, I forget who was just appointed to a board of a major corporation here, Crown Corporation here in Alberta. Oh, that's right, Alison Redford.
Yeah.
Um, so it was. Uh,
ICA was
I'm gonna.
pretty happy with it. They were very complimentary of her resume since then, and
Mhm.
they were pretty cool with her being on the board.
I want to know more though. I'm not going to let you get away with saying I was anti-liberal. I didn't like the liberal
Mhm.
agenda of the PCs because that's a slogan. I
Yeah.
want to know what it was about the Wild Rose that made you say, this is where I want to be. I don't want a slogan. That's easy.
Okay. Yeah. So the other reason was going back to the 2012 election, and the riding that I sat in at the time was Calgary Hawkwood, and the Wild Rose MLA for the 2012 election was Dave Yeager. Previously, I had business dealings with Dave Yeager in that he bought up one of the companies that I was working for. So I knew him and I went, hey, yeah, you'd be a really great energy minister because I was in the energy ministry. I was in the energy space at the time and energy services. So I thought, okay, here's a guy that I've sort of known before, and now he's going to run for the Wild Rose because Danielle Smith asked him to. And way back in 2012, I I had a lot of respect for Danielle Smith. I thought that a lot of her policies, she opposed the GSAs, as I think you remember, Nate. At the time, she was in supportive of the GSAs, and so was I. So that was one of the things that sort of brought in the Wild Rose upstart. Plus, you had all the PC corruption that was very well apparent. They basically governed like they were the natural governing party, and they were omnipotent. They could do whatever the hell they wanted. They could say one thing in the general election, knew that they were going to win, and then campaign completely different and not really, not even really respect their local constituents. So I'm like, okay, time to get rid of them. And so I voted time to get rid of them in 2012. And I was going to write that in 2015, but at the very end of it, it's like, well, do I really want to see the NDP? No. So I'm gonna grin and let's all go to the PCs. But we ended up splitting the baby nearly in half, and the NDP comes up the middle. That's that's what it all is. At the time, I wasn't a full on political organizer, so I was just your average Joe Albertan. That what do you want? You want low taxes, you want world class services, and you want an honest government. And well, 2 out of 3 ain't bad because that's what you got out of the Wild Rosers. And So that's where it was. And in fact, that version of me, when I'm going out and when I'm door knocking or when I'm politically organizing, and even on the policy space, that's what I tend to have to remind a bunch of these people is like back to the UCP AGM. Out of the 35 of them, well, 14 of them were mine. Though, or sorry, when I say mine, I mean they were part of the three CAs that I was working with. So I worked with about 30 people in order to advance those things forward and then eventually get them onto the floor. I got them onto the floor simply because they were average, everyday Albertan type values. Like, do you want a tax cut? Do you want, um, you know, sort of the values that are in conservatism. And then the other ones, the ones that were not the 14 of them, yeah, they get into a little bit, they were the ones that had the elements that were more of the far right elements. But at the end of the day, it's like, can I really like I can't go to the Alberta party. I've tried. They don't really they hate me more than they hate you, Nate. And they actually kicked you out of the Nate. I got one better. They won't even allow me in the building. They at
Well,
least
I
allow
could say
you
the
in the
same
building.
thing about the UCP because I had a membership for about 18 hours before Dustin found out.
Oh yeah. Um, but and I can't go to the NDP because they wouldn't take me either. So then, well, what are you left with? Well, now you're left with working within the UCP, and you go back to, well, okay, could we agree on 7 out of 10 items? And on the 3 out of 10, we'll just agree to disagree. But my 7 and your 7 might only have 4 that are in agreement. But yet, if
I
we
live
can
in
work
Grand
together.
Prairie. I live in Grand Prairie, and the biggest complaint that I hear, like I do not have a different message. I will talk to anybody about education. So I've done all the NDP events up here too, and the number one complaint is you abandoned us. We're alone. We don't have anything. Like there's no choice if you're going to be politically involved up here. There's only one choice, right? Like so fun. But I don't feel like I'm not welcome. I spoke at the microphone 5 times at the AGM, wearing this sweater. It says "Be a
Yeah.
different species of human." It's got a nice happy face on the back. Against skybox tickets, for example, called that out as an actual like lobbyist, bad money in government because, yep. And I didn't vote in favor of Danielle Smith because I figure $250 million in sole source contracts that hurt people is a bad thing. So that's where I'm at. The AGM was insane. It felt like any AGM for any other thing where you have people yelling at each other through microphones, debating hot topics, and collectively deciding what direction to go in. It felt like a union. Weird, hey?
I want to before I let you go on because there's something that Kris said that I have to acknowledge and flesh out a little bit. And I saw you making all of the faces when he said it, so I know that I'm not doing anything. Here's what I here's what I struggle with. Here's what I know that people listening to what you just said, Kris, are going to struggle with. And that is in your description of everything that you disliked about the PCs. It's really hard for me to hear that and not go, guess who you just described today? Because the entitlement is there, the corruption is there, the all of those things that made the PCs so repulsive to people like you. Um, and for those, like, let's be clear, I think that we can agree that corruption's bad.
Yeah.
I think that most Albertans could agree that corruption's bad. I've said for many years that the one cardinal sin that you historically couldn't commit in Alberta politics is to say to Albertans, "I'm better than you and I deserve more." And yet, here we are. Um, how do you square that circle for yourself? Like I get the whole uh there's only one choice, but is it really just that for you there is only one choice, and if that means that you have to um, tolerate the blatant flip that Danielle Smith has perpetrated, that's what you have to do?
I don't tolerate it. I call it out all of the time.
Okay.
Right.
Um, I'm just not a majority. I don't tolerate it. You can ask the people that I'm relentlessly annoying to
Well,
about
that's why I'm asking Kris.
Yeah. I think I think for me, like, I mean, I hear what you're saying, but sort of the choice is that um yeah, it's really like from the line from the officer and gentleman. I got nowhere else to go.
that sucks.
I know it does.
I appreciate that honesty, though.
Yeah.
And I think that there are some political parties who would do well to hear that because I think that you're not the only person who is in that place. And I'm very fortunate in that, I come from sort of the Groucho Marx school of thought. I wouldn't want to be a member of any club that would have me. And fortunately, none of the clubs will have me. So winning. Um, but uh, for people who want to work within a political apparatus, the choice for conservatives right now in the province of Alberta, people who would historically identify as conservatives, who would espouse conservative values, to my eyes, sucks because we do have, uh, like, I could go through all the policies. I had them up in front of me just in cases. But there's some policies in there that I go back to, and I've said this on the show before. I have both of my grandfathers were heavily involved in politics. They were heavily involved in conservative politics. I got a collection of pins upstairs that would make most people's head explode. Um, they would be horrified at the policies that were brought forward at the UCP AGM. And one of the things that I find particularly dissonant that I want to get both of your takes on as well
Mhm.
is we started by talking about education, and we started by talking about education doesn't change votes. What are the things that most people are concerned about? They're concerned about cost of living. They're concerned
Mhm.
about making ends meet. They're concerned about those are the big ticket items. We've got healthcare in there. Uh, those are the big ticket items. There was not one policy at the UCP AGM that addressed those things. And it's dissonant for me to have uh, Danielle Smith as premier say, "Oh, we're fighting for cost of living," and it's like, no, you're not, though, because none of the legislation that existed in the last legislative session addressed those things. None of the policies from the UCP AGM addressed those things.
That
Um,
conversation was being had in the back of the room at the AGM. There were people who were like, so there used to be a spread where a policy in each little
Mhm.
basket was put forward, and that conversation was being had at the AGM, but it didn't work like it used to. But at the same time, this is a reflection of the people who are actually participating and submitting policy. You
Mhm.
can't you can't fault the system for having 900 people actively participate, and then how many was it, Kris? 205.
203. Yeah.
203. That means boards voted them through.
but where I
Mhm.
do find fault, and this is why I brought up the Rick McIver thing, is that there was a stomach for some form of leadership that existed at previous iterations in the last decade of conservative AGMs and policy conventions, where people who were in positions of leadership would stand up and say, "Whoa, whoa, 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 we're about to do a big thing badly. Let's not do that, please and thank you." And they didn't. I mean, Rick McIver, the motion that he spoke against ultimately ended up passing, but
Mhm.
he at least had the stones to say, "I don't like this." And we did not, to my knowledge, I mean, I had some people telling me some things that were going on at the UCP AGM. I might have had a couple of live streams that were getting sent my way. I don't know. But that didn't happen. And I'm curious, especially as the longer political organizer, Kris,
Yeah.
why?
So in terms of that one, okay, so to go back to it, in terms of the top 35 policies, so the policies that were on affordability and cost of living, it was one that was on utilities, and it amended last year's one. And basically what it was, because it was a Calgary Foothills one, so it was one of mine, that I spoke to, and it was on reducing utility bills by removing local access fees and adjusting it so that your transmission and distribution fees would be based upon a sliding scale basis based upon usage, rather than basically so that you don't get the situation whereby somebody shuts down their house, or their winter home, and they get left with about a $80 a month base utility fee, because that's just what the basic fees are. So there was that resolution that made it through. There was a lot of more that were in the affordability space. However, they were not part of the top 35. They were still relatively popular, but they were not part of the top 35. One of the things that has changed, and and I mean, credit to our friends at Take Back Alberta and the Alberta Prosperity Project and all of their associated Take Back Our Freedoms groups, was they do work together in order to push things through. One of the things would be, one of the greatest examples was the one that was I termed it female spaces, and that one went way too far for me. But it did have, basically what it did was it went into the whole all forms of women's spaces, and basically saying, oh, let's go out and let's regulate bathrooms and let's do a whole bunch of other things. I'm like, okay. But that one, it was correct. If anything, it would have pushed up against the boundaries of provincial jurisdiction, because a lot of that stuff is actually municipal jurisdiction through the building codes. But other than that, on that one, I didn't vote yes, I didn't vote no. I was so on that one. But there was a very definite push from a now well-organized base that has taken some very good political and knows how to game the system, and knows how to not really game the system, not just knows the system well enough to know how to work it. So they get up probably 500 to 1,000 Albertans to all go through 203 policies, which, by the way, if you've never seen them before, takes you about 5 to 8 hours to do. And that's from people who are looking at it, and they organize parties, they take over Boston Pizza, and they all sit there with their tablets and phones, and they all go vote, 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 vote. And then they get all pushed through. And the group that's in that was working the Bill of Rights group, very well organized, knows very well what to do. When the whole Bill of Rights debate was going on there, I was having lunch.
I was talking to people on camera.
Yeah.
But the question that I asked was, like, I understand that there are elements that have, and I have long said that one of the characteristics of conservatives that makes them such a force is they will overlook each other's differences slash faults in a way that progressives 100% refuse to, which fragments the progressive movement, and conservatives will just still go and evangelize because that's at the core of it. But and I mean, the policy that you're referring to from the good folks at Calgary Lougheed is a very stupid policy for a whole list of reasons, not just municipal jurisdiction, but like if you there's stalls, damn it. That's what I always go back to. There's stalls. And the Venn diagram of trans people is not a complete, like, just because someone's trans doesn't mean they're a sex offender, period. And the notion that women's spaces needs to be protected, the subtext of that is because trans people are sex offenders, and it's just not true. And the question that I'll rephrase is, why was there nobody from leadership? Where were the Rick McIvers on these policies saying this is not true? Is this who we want to be? Is this how we want to define ourselves? Why is it that dissent
that puts a filter in the process. It does. What
That's what the
absolutely
debate's for.
no, I know, but the filter should be legally possible. So if it's breaking human rights laws, probably shouldn't get through, right? Like it's not a it's just of things that already exist. So why reinvent the wheel if we already have those things? Like we have anti-bullying rules. So what yeah, like
Well, a lot of it on that one from Calgary Lougheed, they're incredibly well organized.
yeah.
Yes.
And the overall reasons as to why you didn't see more on the no side, it goes back to, they're the top 35 policies out of 203. Guess what? They're all going to be massively supported.
But I can't remember a time in any political party in
Yeah.
the last, I'll say at least 20 years is how far back we looked, where every single policy passed. That's
Okay.
new.
I have thoughts there. That
Actually, if I could just start to interject. Sorry, Andrew, but
yep,
if
nope,
I could
go
just
for it.
interject for that. Okay, that's because way back in 2019 at the UCP convention, the 2018 one was that one was because it was a founding AGM. That was the one where they had 1,100 finalists, but it was the founding ones. They were literally starting from a blank slate. 2019 convention, there was 35 policies. They published them all. They only got to number 23 because myself and a bunch of others did a filibuster. And but other than that, then what you also have, yeah. So I mean, 2020 they were averaging about 50, and then 2022 was an unusual year because we were coming out of COVID, so we had like 90. And then in 2023, it was about 120 finalists that was voting on. And then in 2024, we suddenly have 203, but that's a very pared down list from 732, of which we basically, very similar to how Andrea and I got to really know each other through the school voucher groups, we had like 70 Zoom groups that was going on just to try to get people. That female spaces one, that one was 5 or 10. That was another 5 or 10 CA working group. Now, once you have 5 or 10 CAs from around the province and you have a well organized group, they're going to win the day. So then the question becomes is, and particularly going back to the MLAs, is don't say anything that you might regret. Also specific to the MLAs, ever since that Rick McIver one, every year I get the powers that be to go around and say, okay, guys, if you want something to go the other way and you're a MLA, speak out at the other side of the mic because people will vote simply because against you, because MLAs are there to hear from the membership and not speak their mind. At a delegated convention, i.e. the CPC convention, the MPs get up all the time. There was one point where I was debating Michelle Ferrari out of the CPC convention, and it didn't go too well for me.
But I mean, and that again opens up the next question as I push way past the limit that I set for myself. Um, what is the point of MLAs then? What is the point of a premier? Is it purely to represent the interests of the convention that occurs on a yearly basis as opposed to an election that occurs every 4 years? Or is it to provide representation and leadership to the entire province? The aspirational side of me says they should be providing representation and leadership to the entire province. What Danielle Smith is on the record as having saying, no, no, I'm here to represent the policies that were voted at the AGM. She didn't say the no, no part, but it's implied. And that's chilling to me because what that means in effect is a well-organized group of, I'm going to say 4,000 uh, nutters, get to set policy that disregards the charter, it disregards the legal system, and the premier has decided that, yep, those are going to be my marching orders no matter what. Like, I feel like there's books written about this sort of thing, and they don't end well.
It okay. So as a first timer who's never been there before, um, recognizing that that was a different AGM than some, right, Kris? Like that wasn't like stereotype AGM, was it?
Actually, it was fairly typical of recent UCP, the last three.
Okay. There was a lot of emotion, like to walk around the room and feel people's like raw emotion just coming
Mhm.
off of them is it's a powerful thing. You understand why they're there. You can feel the passion for what they're doing there.
Mhm.
And the vibe in the room when they turned down the governance, right, what is it called? It's the R word when you
Resolution?
resolution. There we go. Thank you. The governance resolution about the ethics commissioner. I sitting in the room when they denied that one because they don't trust the judiciary system, like because it said it had to be a retired judge. The entire room went prickly and shot that one down in a visceral way
Mhm.
because they don't trust the institution of our justice system anymore. Like the emotion that was riding through that room was intense, and they were united, and that's exactly it. um I didn't predict 92%. I predicted majority regardless, but I thought there were more people who were going to be upset with her for opposite reasons. But when you get into the room and everybody is like cheering together and everybody
Mhm.
is in that wave, um yeah, that was palpable.
Well,
So
I mean, I would imagine it's like cheering against the Flames at a home game.
except there's no like in the end we're Canadian team against like yeah, sure, right, like, but the I don't I don't know. I wish it was like sports teams because at least you can still find common ground afterwards. But that was intense. I found people who were very sure that teachers are teaching kids how to masturbate. Like they were very sure about it. And I was like, "Oh my God, no, that's not a thing." But you can't convince somebody out of their emotions, right? Like you can't convince somebody. So I really wish that the trustees that are up for election and the boards would actually talk about the things that the people in that room are very, very scared of. There is, can we have a board by board announcement about whether there's actually kitty litter in schools? That'd be really helpful right now. If they could just announce a yes or no sort of thing, or if they could announce that they can't afford to actually accomplish the standards to which we're supposed to get to. That'd be great if they could just talk about that out loud, because otherwise it feels, as a parent who's had to advocate for your kid, it feels like they're an insurance company that is denying and delaying and deposing and all of that. Like it doesn't feel good. It feels like our needs are not necessary and therefore we don't talk about them.
And sort of my response would be, um, I share a lot of your concerns, Nate, with some of the more right wing policies that were passed.
I wouldn't even
And
call them right wing. Like, I don't mean to interrupt. I know I'm doing that a lot, but I wouldn't call them right wing. I would call them straight up progressive because, again, I go back to that definition of conservatism that I grew up with my grandfathers, and this ain't that. So
Was
I
that a Peter Lougheed era?
ish.
Okay, so I felt like at the AGM it felt a little bit more social credit. and the thing that
Mhm.
led into Peter Lougheed. And I would say that to people, and they'd be like, "Ooh, she knows her history." And I'm like, "Yeah, I do."
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. Please
But
continue, Kris.
yeah, it's okay. But I mean, particularly on the recent discussion with the Bill of Rights. So what I was really concerned about, and there was a bunch of us that were really concerned that it would affect us in Calgary, because at the end of the day, I'm on this UCP train in order to get a UCP MLA elected. And if we do a bunch of policies and then the bunch of people in Calgary say no way, or they have any type of other concerns, then all of a sudden all these policies will be for naught because we'll be sitting in opposition. And I'm always remembered by this one quote that I got from a Wild Rose staffer once. How does it go? Your worst day in government is still 10 times worse than your best day in opposition. And so one of the things that I did was immediately after the AGM was I went out, partnered up with a couple of MLAs, went out, hey, let's go door knock a couple doors. Let's go find out what's happening. Let's go to our moderate polls. We already knew from the last election that this was a poll where we barely won it or barely lost it. What I saw was massive support for the UCP and massive support, particularly for Danielle Smith. Number one, the whole Bill of Rights thing did not enter into anybody's context. One of the things, and I will say, this has shocked me since day one. Since the whole transgender piece came out over a year ago in August 2023, I was first shocked by the polling that was coming out of Angus Reid that said that the opt-in consent, the gender pronouns requiring parental consent, all of that stuff, and women and girls and sports, those three items had overwhelming support, like near majority support, unless you were part of one push poll. And even then, it moved about 10 points into the undecided category, but you still had that. So that's what I still see through to this day. To kind of bring it back, well, on this show, I think it was on Sunday night, you were talking about how there's a poll out from a highly reputable pollster in Alberta that shows massive support. Well, I know the public polls. So the public polls coming from the summertime, you do the extrapolation and you come out with about a 55 to 58, maybe even 60 seat UCP majority. And if you extrapolate that poll, if it's who from I say it was, I think it was, wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Hi, Janet. That means that the UCP now has maybe up to 65 to 68% seats, 65 to 8% seats overall, because Edmonton is now collapsed. One of the scary things, and I was looking at the poll numbers to date, your first three NDP losses in Edmonton are really close, but your next 9 or 10, so you start to look at about a dozen seats, and they're all within, like, they're not the Edmonton Strathcona 10,000 vote lead. They're like under 2,000 votes. And if that's true, then what we have right now is we have a fall session whereby the average Edmonton, both urban and rural voter, is massively in support of what Danielle Smith is doing. And now that is starting to concern me, because now it's going to be, okay, where's the end? What I'm worried about is that the pendulum all of a sudden, like in August 2023, it did one of these. It went over to the right. And if my mirroring works, you can see I'm going over to the right. What happens if it snaps back in the middle of a session over to the left? And then all of a sudden we lose. That's the big question. That's the big thing.
We just stopped pushing. What if we just stopped pushing on the pendulum and just let it find a natural middle? Wouldn't that be nice?
Well, no, Andrew, what I'm worried about is that the pendulum is far, far more to the right than what I'm comfortable with.
Yeah, I'm there.
And Danielle Smith is riding a wave, and it's not Pierre Poilievre's coattails because everybody just wants Justin Trudeau out. It's not like something's going on in the
Yeah,
Alberta
that plays
electorate
into it
right
a
now.
little bit though. It's a little bit.
It's
It's
a
a little.
little bit, but not enough to be like, okay, what are we doing here? Because the
Yeah.
only other time that, or sorry, the last time when you had a 72 seat conservative majority, it was Ed Stelmach, and that had a very weak opposition leader, both from the Liberals at the time and the NDP. That was when the NDP had like Rachel Notley and David Hagan, and that was it. You also had a very centrist government in Steady Eddie, Ed Stelmach. Now what you've got is you've got a much more right wing, even I would argue to the right of me. I'm having to make a lot of disagreements over onto the right side, but I'm willing to work with everybody.
Oh, I'm in conflict every day, and I'm a
I
giant
know
conflict.
you're in conflict. I know because you're more centrist than me, Andrea. Um, but and now what we have is now we have a very much extended Danielle Smith honeymoon. And I mean, I've been in Lethbridge. It's very much in play. It's a good thing Naheed Nenshi did not go into Lethbridge because he could get himself spanked in Lethbridge very easily. It is down to get out the vote. And the people that I was talking to, and I know this will probably come out after the general, because they start advance voting tomorrow. So advance voting tomorrow, it is a get out the vote. And the right side in that formerly NDP riding, the right side is more motivated. The left side is saying, look, saying, if I even go to the vote, who cares? Because we're not going to change government. But so maybe they won't go to the polls. If it's a cold day on December 18th in Lethbridge, UCP wins. But I think that's the one. And if that happens, what does that happen to everything that Naheed Nenshi is saying? Everything that the NDP is saying?
Yeah.
And does that embolden our more right-wing side to go even further?
Yeah, that falls in line with the general, like, so the way that I'm feeling it, like, I can understand why people are radicalized. I've been accused of being the same. Let's be clear. The difference is that when you've experienced pain, do you become someone who makes sure no one feels that, or that everyone feels worse because you felt it? Like, is it what's your origin story with that pain, right? And you can feel that something's wrong. Something is definitely wrong. 38% of the grade 9s who wrote the PAT in math last year failed, as in they got below 42%, because 42 is a passing mark on math 9. 38 38% of the people who will be in the workforce in 2027 failed, got below 42% on the math 9. And the ministry definitely isn't talking about learning loss help for anybody older than grade 3. So what do you do? That's like emergency small group instruction that takes kids and fixes that. That is targeted instruction with experts and all of their needs met. That is addressing all of the things that went into a less than 42% mark on their PATs in math. And the amount of effort that's going to have to go into those thousands of current grade 10 students. That's not going to happen this year. Is it going to happen with the new funding model? I don't know. That takes time to roll out and figure out. Everything takes years to do. And it's weird because this is supposed to be an investment in the future. And when you're thinking about education as an investment, and when we're taxpayers, it is costing us money to run an education system. When you are investing in like a stock or any kind of investment, you are hoping to make a return on that investment. You are hoping to put money in so that you get something out of it. And those graduates are the ROI. But instead of measuring it in like election cycles or quarters, we have to measure that in generational gaps. And while the PISA, the international ratings are still good, those are kids who were raised under Ed Stelmach. So we're at a deficit right now, and the kids that are feeling those cuts are coming up, and 38% of them failed grade 9 math last year.
I think if we've learned anything in the province of Alberta, if you want to see a return on investment, what you have to do is get Danielle Smith to give you $100 million, and then you only deliver 50% of the product, and you get to keep the rest of the cash and the interest that that cash earns. That's how you get return on investment in Alberta. That's the story there.
Okay, so we were going to talk about the accelerator fund. They buy buildings, right? And then
I'm gonna say this because we're past the 2 hour mark now. And I think that there are important pieces to this conversation, and I'll be entirely honest. I'm really happy with how this conversation's going. But I also think that if we try to do a 4 hour Lord of the Rings version of this, the wheels are going to come off real fast, and people are really going to tune out of it. So here's what my ask is going to be. I'm going to ask each of you for 90-second summations. But here's my commitment. And I'm probably pissing off a good portion of my audience by making this commitment. I would like to come back for part 2 in the new year. I would like to come back so that we can talk about the accelerator fund. I would like to come back so that we can talk about some of the other issues that exist in education. And I think that there will probably be more things that we can talk about. So if the two of you are open to that, Kris is nodding. Andrea, you game?
Sure.
Okay.
I got more. You know I have more.
No, you do. That's why I'm like, we have to put a pin in this because I think we have at least 2 or 3 episodes that we can do on this. So, who wants to go first for final thoughts for the evening?
I'll let Andrew go first.
Oh, okay. This is weird. I don't know how to finish this. They can't. Nope. Kris has to go first. Nope. I committed in my brain to you going first, so I flushed it all. Nope, it's not there.
Okay. Okay, so I guess my summation on all this political discussion would be, so there's a saying that the customer is always right, which is wrong, because the customer is a singular person. But the market is always right. And if the market doesn't like your product, if the market doesn't like your service, or if the market overall collectively doesn't like you, then that's on you and you have to change. Right now, from all the polling that we're seeing and the extended polling since the election, has been that the more conservative approach is winning the day, i.e. the market is right. Collectively, Albertans, progressives, and, probably it'll be a sort of a tough message for the Breakdown Alberta crowd in order to listen to, but saying, yeah, right now we're in a right of center. Now, myself being a moderate conservative, I have to make a couple of decisions. They're not really too drastic overall. But I can sort of go along to get along a lot easier than most of this audience. But what I would start to say is, particularly to the more people who are centrist, whether you're center left, center right, is start working towards what the average Albertan is looking for. I think you're going to find it's a little bit more right than what you're expecting. That includes the cities. And right now, Danielle Smith is running a hot. So time for change of strategy. That includes even the education piece. In terms of school vouchers. Okay, we already know that Danielle Smith likes school vouchers inherently. So one of the things that you have the opportunity of is to start working with your start working with your UCP MLAs to say, okay, So what can we do? And this is particularly to the school boards and to the school board association and even to the ATA. Okay, if give me on this one. If you gave up on the concept of on opposing school vouchers outright because you're just going to lose, what can you do to order to massage and nuance the strategy so that the school voucher, so that you get the funding that you want, it's just called a school voucher. That was my sort of overanalyzed, because it was a gigantic piece of policy that I was putting through in terms of school vouchers. But that's in terms of the thing. It's saying like, okay, so what can we do? How do you build a bigger tent? How do you rebuild the centrist tent? Well, how you rebuild the centrist tent is you say, okay, we're going to call it a school voucher, but the nuts and bolts of it, it's going to be something that works for us. It's going to be works for something that basically turns around and says, and this is a very unfiscally conservative thing to say, is actually work towards that ministerial order, because I have a feeling that the most complex students are going to be tens of thousands of dollars in order to teach, whereas the average run-of-the-mill student can probably get by with about $3,000 to $4,000 a year. But how do we make it so that you have a very nice little piece of paper called a school voucher that tells the parents, okay, this is the investment. Here's the basic amount. Here's the specialized learning support amount. And then you could take that, go to your school principal, not the Board of Education, but you can go to your school principal and say, okay, this is what the government's funding. How much EA time does this buy? How much average teacher time does this buy with a classroom size of about 26? You'll probably get there on the 26 to 30 for classroom size. I think Andrea is absolutely right. You're going to get, for those complex needs students, they're going to be like, well, that buys you about 2 hours a week worth of EA time. Okay, but now at least you know. Now at least you can go back and say, okay, that's my EA even for these 2 hours. Next year, maybe we get 4 hours. Maybe we get a little bit more. But that's the type of thing that I want to see in terms of the school voucher. And yes, unfiscally conservative, it might be expensive. It might be an extra $1 billion to $2 billion a year. Investment. But we need to get there. And in order to get there, parents need straight information to say, this is how much the provincial government is investing in my child. And that's how you get it through the school voucher. That's how you get it through, hey, my school doesn't have, or my community doesn't have a school. That's what's happening right now in Sage Hill, Nolan Hill, all the areas north of Stony that I work towards on Calgary foothills. So we heard that loud and clear. So now, okay, now you go back to not because we got an NDP MLA in foothills. So now we go back to my friends in the UCP, they're in cabinet saying, hey, guess what? I lost that riding by 250 votes. I could get at least 500. Let's go play games. Can you please give me a new school for that north central area? So those are the types of things that's how you start to work towards the system. That's how you start to work towards the system. Yes, you're going to have to work towards your people within the tent that are more right of center or more right wing than you in terms of what do they want? They want more freedoms. They want the Bill of Rights. If we could get both, if everybody can come away, and here's the most critical piece, if collectively the province of Alberta is on our side through the polls, then we will take government. Then we will hold government. But we will hold government primarily because we have the majority of Albertans on our side. The moment we lose the majority, the moment they say, no, we don't like this Bill of Rights stuff, or we don't like school funding, or we don't like this, that, or healthcare. If healthcare goes bad, we're done like dinner on the UCP side. Danielle Smith's definitely swinging for the fences here. But also to my friends on the progressive side, you need to have the same conversations on the NDP. And I don't think you do. I think, Nate, you were right. I know it's closing, but I think on the progressive side, there is a purity test. I don't pass a purity test. I don't think anybody on this screen passes a purity test. If you do purity tests, then where else is a centrist or even somebody who's moderately right of center going to go? they can only go towards the Take Back Alberta side, because they'll be like, hey, if you're conservative, we'll agree on 7 out of 10 items and we'll just disagree on the other 3. But okay, then we get most of what we want. And so that's the way that you shape it. But I guess, yeah, you have to have public opinion, make a big tent, and to progressives, start to be more leaning towards the centrist to the right of center. Thank you.
All right. Andrea, final thoughts.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. If I were to decide to run for trustee, and I had a big group and I invited everyone who's ever told me that I should run for trustee into the same room, I can't guarantee that some of them wouldn't actually try and fight each other. Because I'm going to have the same conversation and the same goals, and I'm going to try and find a way to work with people toward those goals without like deciding that they've voted a certain way and therefore I can't talk to them. Like, I've spent 20 years in Grand Prairie. I have made connections with people from all walks of life, and they don't agree with each other, but I can get them to agree that this isn't working very well, and that we need to get more involved in those discussions. And people are so resistant to talking about politics. When I get all nerdy about it in public, people they're like, oh, I don't do politics. And I'm like, we politicize what time the sun comes up at this point. When we voted on daylight savings, we politicized the sun. So everything is political, and if you are unhappy with how things are going, you're supposed to get involved with it. That's democracy. That's how it works. And the UCP currently are doing very well at doing that. And when I was a social studies teacher, it was one thing to just list off dates and facts and things, but the grade 7 or social studies is so boring. It's so bad. It's just heavy dates and like events. So my promise to people was that I wouldn't teach them social studies. We would do social studies, and we would have debates, and we would make sure that we were covering all of the different perspectives and talking it through, and then switching sides and trying to argue from the opposite side, because that's the point. You're supposed to do democracy. You're supposed to do social studies. And when I was at the AGM and people would go off on teachers and their indoctrination, I would point out that our high schools actually do mock elections every time there's an election, so provincial or federal, and they would use the same electoral materials and things so the kids could have practice voting with the actual materials and go through that civic participation. We've never not voted blue. Kids here vote blue. So indoctrination isn't working, clearly. So like, and people would sit there with that, and one-on-one, you can have these conversations with a lot of people, but as a group, they know that something's wrong. They know that something's weird and it's just not working. And it's very easy to other people as the solution to that. And I saw a lot of that. The market thing, I know, Kris, I like the market thing for parties. I don't like the market thing for school choice, because that creates winners and losers, and I don't think there should be children in Alberta that end up in the loser pile. I don't think that competition is supposed to work that way as a public institution. I don't think it should work for health, and I don't think it should work for education that way. I'm all about cutting costs, but not corners. And that really matters to me. So when we're talking about parents being faced with the reality that their funding is only going to cover 2 hours of one-on-one support, there's 7,000 people waiting on a wait list for FSCD outside of the school system, and we're not meeting their needs. Like, there needs to be an accountability system, and we need to start telling those stories. So if you're somebody who has a story and you want to tell it, but you don't want to be the one to tell it, I'll tell it. Tell me your story, and I'll tell your story. It'll be a thing. It's going to be horribly terrifying, and I don't want to do it at all. but I also didn't want to speak at the microphone at the AGM, and I did that 5 times. It was awful. But every time I walked away, there were people in the audience who told me that it was really important that I did what I did. And they thanked me and they appreciated that I was there. Even they knew that they couldn't do it. They knew that somebody needed to do it. And I don't want people to be going through pain like I've gone through or like other people have gone through. And I want to make a difference. So if you want to tell your story, tell me your story, and I'll see what I can do with it.
Good stuff. I have one final observation that I want to offer just on the marketplace thing, because I don't think you're wrong, Kris. I think that again, I go back to what I said earlier. If there is a failure in the marketplace, it's a failure to communicate the value proposition. And this is one of the areas that I think that anybody who's not UCP really needs to wrap their head around is that there are certainly elements, I think you've named a couple tonight, but there are certainly elements in the UCP that are okay with lying to people, and they're okay with misleading people, and they're okay with disseminating bad information. And if that is not met in some capacity, those things will win. History has taught us that. So I think that your marketplace argument is apt, but I think it also highlights the need for a better value proposition for people who want to be alternatives. All of that being said, I want to thank you both so much for this conversation tonight. I want to thank our audience who's made it this far so much for sticking around for way longer than I said that we were going to. I want to thank you both for being willing to commit to a second part to this conversation. I'm not going to lie. I approached this with some caution for a whole list of reasons. But I think that the
Hey, I
value,
was right.
there you go. I think that the value of the conversation has at least to me proven itself, and that means I can probably convince everybody else on the team that it's a good idea. So thank you both so much for taking the time to chat tonight. And
No more echo chambers.
yeah,
No more.
we've never done echo chambers here on the show.
I was in one. It was called the AGM.
Okay, that's fair. And we will revisit this again in the new year. So thank you both so much.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
And that's it for another episode of The Breakdown. As always, if you appreciate the kind of content that we're trying to produce here, we would love nothing more than if you thought about signing up to be one of our Patreon sponsors at www.patreon.com/thebreakdownab, where for just the price of a fancy cup of coffee a month, you can help us continue to produce this kind of content. Whether you're listening to the audio version of the podcast, in which case, maybe leave a review and a rating, or whether you're watching it on one of our streaming platforms, we want to say a big thank you to everybody who is part of the Breakdown's audience. And as always, take care of each other and keep the conversation going.